Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. The retreat has been underway for about 3 days now. And just in the course of this time, it's probably striking for most people, probably impressive for most of us, just how wide the range of mind states that can arise during the course of a day. This is something that is always striking to me, impressive at the beginning of a retreat, and I always like to reflect upon this because it's so easy to get caught up in the content of all the different activities, the different voices going on within us. But it's important, rather than getting caught up, getting identified with all the different voices, different characters that carry on, say their piece within our thoughts, to be learning to listen, to just recognize these are the voices of the mind. And rather than getting identified with what they say, just to be instead learning to attend, to listen to all of the voices of the inner committee. During the course of a day, we have the voice of the ardent, the keen meditator, the serious, committed spiritual seeker, absolutely hell-bent on nibbana, if that's the right term to use, heaven-bent on nibbana, to being resolute, determined, clear-minded, and then the mind drifts into worrying and fearing, complaining. We hear the voice of the fussy, impatient critic, complaining and criticizing, grumbling, moaning about the body, moaning about our state of health, moaning about the people around us, the weather, the routine. Drifting off into fantasies, memories, caught up in strange recollections, and often it's just the mind hungering for something to chew upon, something to occupy itself with, just some random thought, something that we hear or see or smell crosses the mind, and then off the mind goes, and suddenly we're caught into some little tangle, like trying to remember, what was the name of that school teacher? Who was it that taught me geography back in the lower fourth? What was the name of that riding instructor? The one with a really loud voice. Came from that riding school in Benenden. What was her name? I remember her. Things that happened 30, 40 years ago, out of our childhood, or some random event of the week before. What was it that I said? What did they say to me? how does that line in the sutta go? Just some passing thought, and then the mind just jumps upon it and gets caught up, reminiscing about the past, complaining about others, being caught up in academic details of a sutta quotation, doubts about our practice or doubts about our conduct. These are the voices of the inner committee, all the different characters that populate our minds, the wise and gentle, serene voices, the restless and agitated, childish voices, the lustful and passionate, reactive voices. So as we sit here together, gathering together during these days, and aiming to guide our practice towards clarity, towards peacefulness, towards understanding. And one of the key elements in this, how the practice develops and bears the greatest fruit, is in this very capacity to be a savaka, to be a listener, one who's listening to the way things are, listening to the sounds of the world, listening to the Dhamma, the savaka sangha, the sangha of those who listen, listening to the sound of the Dhamma. So in essence what this is doing is learning to pay attention or to notice the content of our thoughts, the different reactions when we're tired and sleepy, when we're energetic and bright, when we're feeling comfort, when we're feeling discomfort. To be able to listen to all those voices of the different committee members of our own thoughts, our own reactive patterns. To listen to them, to hear them, to respect them for what they are, whether it's a voice of wisdom or the voice of a reactive 3-year-old, to pay attention, to recognize these are just the patterns of thinking. These are just the voices of the mind. There's nothing to grasp hold of there. There's nothing we don't have to believe in them. We don't have to reject them. We don't have to identify with them. We don't have to take them as me or mine. But that's what the mind's habit is, isn't it? It's always our attention is drawn into the particular issues, the promise of something that we're fantasizing about that we really would like to have, or the promise of something that was badly done, something that was some harm that was done to us that really should be punished. Trying to remember that person's name that we really can't be at peace until we remember what that person's name was. Yeah, who was that riding instructor? What was their name? We get caught into those, and then we believe in the messages that they are bringing. That harm is unforgivably wrong, or that promise is going to be completely satisfying. If you can remember that quotation, then you will be utterly satisfied. But it's never true. It can never be true. But the habit that we have is to be drawn into the content of our thoughts, drawn into the hopes, the fears, the aversions, the complaints, the excitements, the doubts. We get born into those worlds. This is in a way what the very essence of rebirth is. There's a form takes shape, and the mind is born into it, grabs hold of it, identifies with it, and builds its reality out of that. So this is hard for us to do, but this is the key element of the practice is to be able to listen to our patterns of emotion, our thoughts, and to in a way, restrain that habit of rebirth, to restrain that tendency to grasp and take hold, and to become that, to not buy into it, but just to know this is a thought, this is a mood, this is a memory, this is a plan, this is a collection of words. That's all, no more, no less. Particularly at the beginning of a retreat, and this, when we've changed the routine and there's a lot less external engagement and a lot less of an opportunity to, say, involve ourselves with others and engage in activity and things that we're normally feeding our habits of gratification with, the things that we are, say, feeding our hunger for being, our hunger for selfhood, our hunger for identity. We're no longer feeding it with the usual things of going places, doing things, carrying out jobs. We're no longer performing as a person. We're not doing so much of that. So rather, like if you're addicted to some kind of a drug like caffeine or sugar or nicotine, as you reduce the dose, then the agitation gets more intense, the hunger gets more apparent because you're not getting your usual drug of choice. So that hunger manifests itself in an inner restlessness, a kind of desperation. And we can feel that. Certainly this is very common at the beginning of a retreat, to feel that certain desperation, the mind hungering for something to do, something to be, some object to identify with. That just being with the feeling of the breath, walking up and down, listening to the nada sound, this is not gratifying, this is not feeding my need to be, my desire to be somebody, to be something, to have some kind of defined identity is not being fed. So the mind conjures up memories from the past, plans about the future, loves, hates, campaigns, projects, brilliant ideas, epic poems, dharmic musicals, ailments, different illnesses that we're sure that we have. Anything will do. It's quite amazing sometimes how shameless and flagrant the mind will be, just grabbing hold of any old thing, anything it can come up with, past, future, likely or unlikely, realistic or unrealistic, it doesn't matter. Anything will do. It's like fire seeking fuel. Anything will do. Anything that is burnable will do. The fire will seize hold of it and do its best to burn it up as fuel. So that's part of the challenge then, is to feel that intensity of the mind hungering for some sense of being, and to feel that hunger, to feel that appetite, that burning, and to gently, steadily, and patiently keep resisting that, restraining that, not getting caught in it, not getting swept up in that agitated burning, that hungering to be, hungering to do and to have, to get. And that takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of strength, of resolve, it takes that quality of adhitthana, inner resolution. But if we can apply that, if we can sustain that quiet, steady, patient quality, then it really brings tremendous benefit, tremendous blessings. And even if what comes up in our mind is really compelling or convincing, like, no, I really have got to, I really ought to telephone my mother, I really do need to go see the doctor, I really have got to, I really should, I must. I can't rest until X, Y, or Z, whatever the mind is chasing after. I've got to know, I should do, I have to ask about. To bring the attention to that feeling of compulsion, that feeling of intensity in the heart, and to know that, to bring the attention to that very feeling of friction, that feeling of going against the stream of desire, going against the stream of becoming. And it's that very friction is what it's called the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. That very friction is what we, in a way, is the central element of the practice in the Dhutanga tradition, the forest tradition. We're deliberately simplifying our life, deliberately living as simply as possible, as close to the earth as possible, living with as few possessions and as few activities as possible. That's in order to create that friction. And that, because that friction is what helps to keep our wisdom sword, the blade of wisdom. It keeps that really sharp, really keen, if we handle it wisely. But it is difficult, and particularly when the mind gets caught up in very convincing things that seem extremely reasonable, and we've got some very substantiated project that we need to do, I really should do, I really got to do. Or some unrequited love, or an unresolved doubt. The mind can feed on that, can take hold of it and just burn away hour after hour, day after day, conjuring up the idea of what you've got to have, or what you've got to get rid of, or the doubt about your conduct, or your past, or how things, what really happened. What really, really, really happened. It takes a lot of effort, and all of us have had these kind of challenges in the past. Certainly for myself, I've experienced this many times, particularly on longer retreats and solitary retreats in particular. And it can be very demanding and challenging. But this is also where our companionship, the kalyana mita, the aspect of spiritual friendship, plays a big part. Because when we're experiencing that difficulty, or that intensity, that sense of the mind desperate to find something to grab hold of, some kind of distraction or some kind of escape route, then the very steadiness, the strength, the presence of our spiritual companions can be exactly the thing that helps us to stay with the practice, to not get drawn off, to not get swept away, carried off by the flood of the obsessions, the gaha. I remember one time I was on a solitary retreat, and this was one of the most intense experiences of this for myself. I'd been a monk about 10 years or so it was about 20 some odd years ago, and so it was the first few days of the retreat time. It was just a long exhalation of bliss. This is wonderful. This is great. Then by the time it got to about the third or the fourth day after this, how wonderful, how peaceful. Here I am in the forest, nothing to do, just me and the kuti and the sky and the squirrels and the ground. So as a contrast to having had a very active and full-on schedule here at Amaravati, then it was a blissful relief to have a contrast with everything just being quiet and calm and undemanding. And then on about the fourth day, the mood shifted, and it went from being how blissful, how wonderful, just the sky and the kuti and the forest and the earth. It changed to being just the sky, just my kuti, just the earth, my mind. That's it. Nothing else. And that what had been blissful and delightful, just as a contrast to the busyness, suddenly became an experience of deprivation, experience of hunger. The mind starting to look for something to do, something to engage with, some person to be, some role to perform. And then when it's just, you're there with your mind, keeping silence, being alone, there's nothing to do, no duties to follow, then it was startling, amazing to me how the mind just had this raw intensity, just the raw feeling of hungering for being. And at the time I didn't really notice, I didn't really understand how it was working, but it was just very unsettling, challenging, just this feeling of desperation in the heart and the mind, trying to grab hold of something, anything to identify with, and then chasing off into the past, off into the future, just hungering desperately, looking here and there and everywhere for some kind of foothold, some kind of identity, some person to be, something to be. And then at that time, then it was what eventually I found myself doing these long sittings out in the forest, and I'd put out a sitting mat, and this was in the forest at Chithurst, and I'd put out a little sitting mat and sit on the slope and just go down by the lake, and I found I'd sit there for like 4 or 5 hours just saying no, 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 no. All the different things my mind was trying to grab hold of. Past, the future, something to love, something to hate, something to desire, something to regret. No, 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 no. And then every so often the mind would get whoa, swept away by some particular current and then carried off. And then after a few days, then I got seriously caught up with some memories of the past and some doubts about things that had been said and done, and what I'd really said and what had really happened, and the mind got completely carried away, absorbed in this. And I was trying to keep this in perspective, but it was so compelling and so demanding. Hour after hour, day after day, my mind would keep rehearsing, going over particular events, things that were said, things that were done, and what did I really say? What did I really do? What really happened there? What did he say? What did she say? Over and over and over and over again. And this part of my mind was trying to see this just as, these are just sankharas, just arising, passing away. These are just empty phenomena, coming into being, disappearing. These are impermanent. These are unsatisfactory, not self. But and then the other voice in my mind was, but these are real problems. You've really got to take responsibility for this. These are things that you've got to work out. You can't just brush it aside using the old anicca, dukkha, anatta escape clause. You can't. That's too easy. You can't just get out of it like that. You've got to work this out. You've got to take responsibility for this. And my mind was going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and caught up in that tangle of the whole the jungle of memories, the sort of tangled brambles of memory and imagination and projection. and continually just trying to see it objectively, but not never really quite say letting go, never really quite seeing it clearly, never really quite understanding it because of the compelling and intense strength, the strong quality of it. And it wasn't until one day when it was a particularly intense moment where my mind said, listen, these are real problems that it's your responsibility to worry about. And I'm never going to let you rest until you admit it, you bastard. So I thought, aha, this does not sound like the voice of wisdom. I do not think that the voice of the Buddha would speak like that. This is definitely the voice of Mara. These nagging doubts, these fears, these endless self-recriminations. This is all just the voice of Mara. This is just papancha, conceptual proliferation. So it was interesting when it finally resorted to foul language. That it's the untrustworthiness of it was apparent. But up until then, it was this sense of, well, should I believe this, or is this something that I should go along with? Is this valid? Is it not valid? Is it true? Is it not true? So sometimes we're blessed with a very clear readout, very clear impression like that. Other times it's not so obvious. But what I would encourage as we begin this first days of the retreat, we're beginning this time of seclusion together, is to not consider, if your mind is getting lost in this kind of intensity or distraction, if you're experiencing that kind of intensity, the mind chasing after different distractions, don't look upon this as something going wrong with your practice. Don't look at this as if something is out of place. Yeah, that in a way it's more of a sign that you're doing the right thing. It's more of a sign that the medicine's working, because through the act of simplifying things, of narrowing down our range of desire objects, narrowing down the range of things to identify with, then we're deliberately focusing the whole the desire mind through a very narrow channel. So we should expect a great deal of friction, a great deal of that kind of abrasion or intensity. So I would say it's more a sign that the practice is working, that you're doing the right thing. It doesn't mean that the mind is very quiet, but it should be seen as just a natural artifact or a simple result of slowing everything down, simplifying everything, narrowing the range of objects, walking, sitting, standing, lying down, coming, going. Very, very simple, achingly simple. But it's through that simplicity and through narrowing the focus, narrowing that channel of activity, then we can see most clearly how it works. As we reduce the number of objects that there is for the mind to latch onto, the range of activity, it becomes clearer and clearer how the whole system works, how the whole, say, the engine of conceptual proliferation, how that works, how the papancha engine works, of the mind ceaselessly producing random thoughts and ideas, hopes and fears, memories, opinions, reactions. I like to chant the Lacunae Suta. We did that yesterday, today, because in many respects, the Lacunae Suta, the discourse on the characteristic of not self, this contains the really key teaching on the development of insight, and It gives us the tools that we need to work very precisely and directly on this habit of identification, the way that the mind grasps and tries to be born into things inside and outside, coarse and fine, high and low. As it says in the sutta, and I would encourage people to read the translation of the sutta as well as reciting the Pali. As it says, ajatawa, bahidawa, or larikangwa, whether it's outside or inside, coarse or fine, far or near, pure or impure, and to consider for every aspect of the body, rupa, physical form, material form, inside or outside, every aspect of feeling, pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neutral feeling, all the different aspects of perception, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch, every aspect of the mental world, our thoughts, our ideas, our mental images, our plans, our regrets, our inspirations, our sadness, our grief, all of it. This is, and the very act of cognizing itself, vijnana, the act of cognizing, of knowing, that all of these are not who and what we are. They do not have an owner. They are in a constant state of change, of transiency. So here in the Lacunae Suta, it spells that out for each one of the 5 khandhas: physical form, perceptions, feelings, mental formations, consciousness. That the Buddha analyzes each one of these. Says, is it appropriate to say of these, if the body of material form if it's in a state of change, is it possible for that to be permanently satisfying? If things are changing, can they satisfy? If they can't satisfy, and if they're changing, can they be who and what we are? Is it appropriate to say of them, etang mama, this is mine, eso hamasmi, this I am, eso me ata, this is myself. So for each one of the 5 khandhas, whether it's a sound that we hear, a feeling in the body, whether it's an idea or a memory, whether it's our physical form itself or the temple or the landscape around us, the tree or the ground or the sky, whether it's the feeling of I know, I see, I think, I feel, I remember, coarse or fine, pure or impure, far or near, inside or outside. For every single one of these, when we look, we can ask, is it appropriate to say of this, etang mama, this is mine, this has an owner, eso hamasmi, this I am, eso me ata, this is myself. So it's a method of analysis. We're using these reflections to explore our experience, to explore the mind's, formation. It's the mind's forming of the world, how the mind creates perceptions and thoughts, ideas, and creates the world out of those forms, those perceptions. So we're using these teachings to explore that, to pick that up, to look at it, and to examine. Is this mine? This sound that I hear, does it have an owner? It's known in this place, it's known here, but can you own a sound? Or a feeling in the body? Yeah, the feeling is known. It seems to be happening in this body and it's known here, but what is the thing that's doing the owning? Is there an owner? Is there a person, an individual, an entity that is the owner? How can anything own something else? How can that happen? What does that mean? So that rather than trying to create a fixed idea about, or the true theory of owning or the true theory of a real self, this isn't what the Buddha's teaching is pointing to. Rather, it's using these reflections on anicca, dukkha, anatta to explore the habits that we have about experience, about who and what we are and the world around us, and to see that this is a fabricated reality. Our impressions of the world are pieced together. They're formulated, they're concocted, they're compounded, they're made up of separate parts. They're an impression which is held together through force of habit more than anything else. Now, this is very familiar territory for many of us. People here have been practicing meditation, hearing Buddhist teachings. We've been doing this for years and years, some of us longer than others. But and that's one of the dangers of having heard this all over and over again, is that the mind hears, oh yeah, I know this, anicca, dukkha, anatta. Wake me up when we get to a new bit. You know? I've read this chapter already. You know, I know what happens in this chapter. So then, because the words are familiar, then we gloss over it. We forget to apply it. We don't actually engage the practice. It's like having a key. We're locked in a cell, and we have the key, but we don't bother putting the key in the lock and turning it. So these reflections on anicca, dukkha, anatta, it's only if we actually apply them that when the mind is getting lost in some stream of papancha, some stream of conceptual proliferation, planning the future, revisiting the past, creating some wonderful alternative reality, it's only when we actually apply these reflections that it can dissolve the papancha, it can bring that distraction to an end. It's interesting that these qualities that are there in the Lacunae Suta, these that are described in those three phrases, etang mama, eso hamasmi, eso me atta. These are called the Puncher Dahmers. Etang mama, this is mine, that represents tanha, craving, is the first of the Puncher Dahmers. Eso hamasmi, this I am. That the second of the Puncher Dahmers is conceit. The conceit of I am, the conceit of I am as a fundamental absolute reality, conceiving a separate individual me, a separate I. Eso me atta, this is myself. Ditthi, or views, a view about what a self is. And the view of myself is this, or myself is that. So craving, conceit and views, these are the Puncher Dahmers. So this is the way that the mind continues to create an individual self, creates an image of a separate me who's moving around in the world, utterly individual and independent of everything around me. It's held into being, that impression is held into being through these habits of clinging, these habits of craving, conceit and views, and by the stories that are continually reiterated, the stories of the past. I was born in England, I am English, I am a man, I am a monk. I live at Amaravati Monastery. I have this particular character, I have this particular collection of memories and stories. That's who I am. This is just papancha. The Puncher Dahmers, they are the stories that hold together the illusion of separate selfhood. So that the practice of insight is to in a way hold up the process, the habit of self-creation to the eye of wisdom, like bringing the eye of wisdom close up to those habits, and to challenge that with that when we're like putting it under the microscope, bringing it up close and saying, oh yes, well, what makes this a self? What makes this something that belongs? What is that? How does that happen? What's the thing that's doing the owning? What is this self that is independent and separate? What does it look like? What shape does it have? Does it have a form or a color or a texture? What is it? So in the development of the practice, as the mind settles down and we develop more of a quality of focus and attention to the present, the mind settles more easily in the present moment, and we don't need to tie the attention so firmly to the breath or to the nada sound, just to be focused on the present. Then, as most people are familiar with, the practice can be guided towards a much more of a non-discriminative awareness. If the attention rests easily in the present moment and is not being distracted, carried away, then we can simply rest with the heart, the mind open, receiving the flow of perceptions and impressions, the things that we hear around us, the feelings in the body, different thoughts, waves of emotion and mood that arise, and to meet each one, to meet each particular pattern of feeling with these same considerations, these reflections on anicca, dukkha, anatta, seeing through the habitual reactions of I like, I don't like, this is inside, that's outside, this is beautiful, that's ugly, this is painful, this is pleasant, that's mine, this is me, and this is on the inside, and that's the world, that's on the outside. Rather than dividing our experience up into those categories, instead we are receiving it, knowing it through a different set of lenses. Like in a microscope, we have the lenses that are put together to help us see clearly and very close up. Then in the microscope of the Dhamma, we have these three lenses of anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence and satisfactoriness, not self. So that when we hear a sound, then we can ask, is that permanent or impermanent? Is that changing? Is it satisfactory? If it's changing, can it satisfy? If it's a beautiful sound, can it satisfy? If it's an ugly sound, when it ends, can that ending of the ugly sound be permanently satisfying? Like this morning there was a lorry making a lot of noise outside, so you could hear a sound. You could think how unwanted or unpleasant that sound was, but then when the sound stopped, there's a moment of relief where the absence of the sound is consciously pleasant, but that conscious active pleasantness can only last for a little bit, and then the absence of noise of the lorry became completely ordinary, unremarkable. Like right now, the last few days it's been so windy, a lot of noise from the wind blasting away, and so how many of us sitting here this evening noticed, oh, how completely silent it is. Here's the sound of the absence of wind. We notice the silence just after the wind stops, but then it's only in the contrast that it's apparent. We get used to it. It becomes ordinary. So this is pointing to how the very quality of dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, no thing can please us permanently and completely all the time. The mind gets habituated to experiences. So the pleasant becomes ordinary, the mind adapts to that. The unpleasant becomes bearable, becomes ordinary, the mind adapts to that. When it fades away, we have a moment of relief, and then it adapts to that. The mind can't stay in a state of pleasure continually. And anatta, when we hear a sound, or we experience a thought or a memory, an idea, we need to actively engage that quality of reflection, curiosity. Is this mine? This thought, this memory? No one else knows this event. No one else was around when this happened. I'm the only person, only being in the world who remembers this thing. So therefore it must be my memory. It's very personal, unique. It must be mine. But then it's picked up and explored, and then just looking at that very feeling of mineness, the feeling of owning. Like, well, okay, no other being was around when that happened, but the experience of the memory is just a pattern in nature, like the sound of the wind in the temple roof, or the sound of a voice, a feeling in the air around us as the breeze blows on our skin. We explore that very feeling of owning, of being, of having. And then that too, just in itself, not out of believing in a particular idea about it, but through the direct observation, the direct knowing, as a recognition, oh look, that feeling of owning arises and passes away. That feeling of me arises and passes away. That feeling of mineness, arises and passes away, just like the wind blasting the tiles and the sound of a word beginning and ending. How could it be who and what I am? How could it truly have an owner? So it takes effort, it takes application to bring these reflections to each and all of our experiences. If we don't bother to really pick up our experience and examine it in this way, then the insight, the change of heart won't bother to arise. It doesn't change our hearts, but it's when we apply that, we take the trouble, make the effort to examine, to explore every experience in this way, then their true emptiness, the true insubstantiality, the voidness of all the patterns of experience is truly known, truly realized, truly recognized. And in that seeing of emptiness, then the heart is freed. In one of his most compelling collections of images that the Buddha used in talking about this, he said he was at a place called Ayodhya on the bank of the Ganges, and with a group of people, and saw there's a lump of foam carried along the surface of the river, and he said, you see that lump of foam on the water? It's completely void of substance. It has a shape, but there's nothing there. It's not solid. It's got no concrete, firm, substantial quality to it. It's just a shape. So this is just like rupa, the body, material form. It's just like that foam on the water. And then he said, when in the rainy season, as water pours down from the sky, the rains strike the ground, and the rain hits the surface of a pond, then as the raindrop hits the surface of the pond, then for a moment a bubble is formed, a sphere of water forms as a bubble. It takes shape just for a moment, for a flash, a finger snap. So feeling, Vedana, is like a water bubble, just like a raindrop hitting the surface of a pond. Bop. Just for a moment, the shape is there and then it's gone. Perceptions, sanya, are like a mirage out in the desert. The heat in the desert shines on in the air and causes the images that are from far away to be seen, to take shape and to shimmer before us. But the mirage is insubstantial. It's just patterns of light in air. There's no thing really there. Sankhara, mental formations, intentions, plans, memories, ideas. These are like the trunk of a banana tree, a plantain, that is leaf upon leaf upon leaf. There's no trunk. There's no solid wood in the core of a plantain tree. It's just a leaf upon leaf. You keep peeling away the leaves and there's no core, there's no heartwood, there's no center. Just like a leek or an onion. It's all just leaf and no tree, no wood. So the sankhara is like a plantain, a banana tree. Hollow, insubstantial, void. And vijnana, consciousness, the very act of cognizing itself, is like a conjuring trick. It's like a conjurer performing a magical illusion. It looks like there's a rabbit really coming out of the hat, or a vase of flowers appearing from the pocket. But it's just a trick. It's just an illusion. There's no real magic there. Consciousness is like a conjuring trick. So just as when there's that, we see one of these things, we say, "Oh, look, it's a mirage. Oh, it's just a bubble. Oh, it's just a conjuring trick." Then that which recognizes, "Oh, it's just a form. There's no substance there. There's nothing solid." That is the change in our heart when we see through the trick, the illusion of solidity of the self, of the me as an individual, separate, solid person, me as the owner of experience, me as the doer, the owner, the haver, the actor. It's like seeing through a conjuring trick, or seeing through the shape of a bubble, or of an illusion, a mirage. Oh, look, there's nothing there. It was just a trick. It was just an optical illusion. That's all. There's no thing there. And in that moment, there's a recognition of seeing things truly, seeing things in a valid and clear way. The illusion has been popped. The trick has been ended. So as the time of retreat develops and the mind settles more, then this is the direction to steer things into establishing that an open quality of awareness that receives the different perceptions. Like in this temple receives all of us, human beings. It receives us into the space that all these us beings arrive in this space, we do our thing here, and then we separate. So similarly in the space of our minds, the different entities show up. Images from the past, images from the future, feelings, thoughts, sensations, they all come into the temple, the templum, the sacred space of our own awareness. They come, they do their thing, they dissolve. Some are beautiful, some are ugly, some are neutral. Some are wanted, some are unwanted, some we're indifferent to. Some are pleasant, some are painful, some are neutral. But just like all the different people, all of us who come into this temple, tall, short, female, male, old, young, cheerful, depressed, neutral, we come, we do our thing here, then we go. So in exactly the same way that our own hearts, our own minds can be exactly the same kind of temple, this templum of the sacred space that in our meditation then is receiving all the different impressions, different perceptions, different formulations of the world, and our mind, our body. It comes into that space, it's known, and it dissolves. And then each of the objects, each of the different formations that arise within the space of our own citta, our own heart, our mind, then the way that we see, oh, this is just a formation, this is just a pattern of nature. the way that that is seen most clearly is through the application of these simple reflections. To consider, is it changing? Is it satisfactory? Can it truly satisfy? Does this have an owner? Is this truly me? Is it truly who and what I am? Asking these kind of questions, examining, exploring all of our patterns of experience, then we see every single one of them, every single one without exception, has to be as empty as every other. Some it's obvious that they are empty or not self. The sound of a truck, outside, not very difficult to consider, well, that's not self, that's just the noise of the lorry, that's not mine, it's just... But that memory, that unique recollection of some event in our life that really does have that feeling of mine, me, or some close relationship, our parent or our child, a love or a hate, that really is real, that is something different, that's substantial. But then to look at that very feeling of, oh no, that's different, that's my mother, that's that's my ex, or that was the most unforgivable thing that I did, or I can't let that go. That's my responsibility to worry about that. I can't let that go. But to bring that eye of Dhamma, the Panya Chaku, the eye of wisdom, to bear upon every single one of these experiences, every single pattern, the ones that are obviously not who and what we are, and the ones that definitely, absolutely seem to be who and what we are. But I am a woman, I am a man. I did do that wrong, I should be punished, or that was really great, and I am proud of that. She is my mother. Just to look at that very density of feeling, that intensity of identification, and to look, to explore. What's that feeling of mineness? That is me, that is mine. I can't let go. What is it that forms that feeling of, I can't, I must, I have to? What is that? Where does it come from? What's its form? What's its shape? And we see, we recognize, sometimes to our amazement, oh look, that too, that feeling of, but I am. That is what I am, that is me. That very feeling arises and passes away, and that feeling of I is not self. Even though what it's saying is I, it's not I. It's just saying that. That's just its pattern, its form. It's like the foam on the water, or the mirage. It's not solid, it's not substantial. There's no core, no substance there. As the Buddha said in the Dhammapada, in verse 170 of the Dhammapada, those ones who look upon the world as unstable, insubstantial, as a bubble, a mirage, as illusions, these are the ones death cannot find. Those ones who look upon the world as unstable, insubstantial, as a bubble, a mirage, an illusion, those are the ones death cannot find. This is how we escape the Lord of Death. We free the heart from birth and death, from endless dependencies and compulsions. Simply recognizing the empty, illusory quality of emotion, of thought, of feeling, hope, fear, regret, inspiration, desperation, pleasure, pain, sweet, sour, beautiful, ugly, inside, outside, coarse and fine, sacred, profane. The whole catalogue, the more completely it's seen as empty, as void, insubstantial, unstable, as bubbles, mirages, illusions, then death cannot find us. The heart is freed from that bondage, freed from that burden, escaped from the wheel of birth and death. It's left that cycle of compulsion, a cycle of dependency, the cycles of birth and death. It's left it far behind. It's free, it's timeless, infinite. So I offer these thoughts for consideration this evening.